Good afternoon and welcome back. You're watching the Midday Report and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Could European leaders deliver a Christmas miracle for Ukraine just in time for the holidays? The miracle of unlocking essential funds for the reconstruction of the embattled country. At this critical point in the decision-making process, unity is key, especially with Moscow pressing to stop the assets being used to fund a recovery loan for Ukraine. Our correspondent in Brussels, Angela Skujins, has more on what the expectations are regarding the Thursday meeting.
Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region wakes to another day in darkness as Europe looks for ways to support its neighbour in the north. The International Monetary Fund says Ukraine needs €137 billion over the next 2 years to keep its budget afloat and defences running. European leaders could deliver a Christmas miracle by unlocking funding for the war-torn country at a crucial summit in Brussels on Thursday. The Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever is poised to play a decisive role. There are two funding options formally on the table for Ukraine. The first and most controversial of the pitches is a reparations loan. This is giving Ukraine a loan based on the immobilised Russian state assets, the lion's share of which are currently held at Belgian financial institution Euroclear to the tune of €210 billion. The Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever has maintained his opposition against the pitch, stating it is fundamentally wrong. He is fearful that Russia could take Belgium to court. The Kremlin has already described this proposal as akin to theft. The other option is common debt. This would require national governments to dig deep into their own coffers to front up the cash for Ukraine. We know this is the least preferred of the options.
We will have to decide which way we want to take, which route we want to take. But one thing is very, very clear. We have to take the decision to fund Ukraine for the next 2 years in this European Council.
At the end of the day, however, de Wever's veto is not the reparation loan's death knell.
The question is not whether Belgium will be in favour or not. The question is whether a qualified majority of the member states.
At the meeting, leaders will also tackle growing the European Union, the long-term budget and how to stay competitive in a shifting global economy. Leaked draft conclusions state leaders will encourage enlargement at speed with a focus on internal reforms.
Aspiring members need to continue their reform efforts, notably in the area of rule of law, in line with the merit-based nature of the accession process and with the assistance of the EU.
Corruption scandals in Ukraine have sharpened scrutiny of its EU bid. But a recent meeting between EU enlargement chief Marta Koz and Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister for EU Affairs Taras Kachka firmed up a roadmap. The aim? That when member states give the enlargement green light, Ukraine is already prepared. Kyiv's path to EU membership is clearer, but how it will be funded is not, with everything riding on this week's Brussels summit. Ukraine is now waiting for that Christmas miracle or another winter of uncertainty. Angela Skujins for TVP World.
While the U.S. pressures Ukraine to cede the territory it controls in the Donbas, residents there reject even the thought of joining Russia. In fact, many fear they would be killed by Russian forces for supporting Ukraine. Here's more.
Slavyansk, a town in western Donbas, was amongst the first ones to experience Russia's war against Ukraine. With peace negotiations underway, the issue of territorial control over the Donbas remains pressing. But while Moscow and Washington insist Ukraine cede the territory to Russia, residents don't express unanimous support.
I think that if there are any people who want to stay here under Russian occupation, that would be a very small number. Everyone can see who it is that's shooting at them.
Especially that most locals understand what awaits them should they live in Russia's grip.
When we talk about maybe future occupied territories, we know how it will be. We know that when Russia established the control under the territories, they literally kill those who support Ukraine.
Any decision from policymakers involved in the negotiations will have an impact on people's everyday lives.
This is not about just, territories, about hundreds of thousands of people who live there and want to live in Ukraine.
Particularly that every day the residents of Slovyansk are reminded of who it is that wishes to control them.
Serbia is breaking with a long-standing tradition of its EU relations. President Aleksandar Vučić says Belgrade will not attend this week's EU Western Balkans summit in Brussels. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić has confirmed that neither he nor any other official will represent Serbia at the EU Western Balkans summit in Brussels on Wednesday. Speaking to Serbian television, Vučić said it would be the first time in more than a decade that Serbia skips the meeting, arguing the decision shields his government from political pressure. He acknowledged the move would draw criticism in Brussels, but insisted Serbia would continue on its EU path while he remains president. Serbia is one of the few European countries not to impose sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine, despite repeated EU calls for alignment. At the same time, Belgrade has condemned the war, backed Ukraine's territorial integrity, and provided humanitarian aid while maintaining political contacts with Moscow. The Lithuanian military has officially refuted reports of large numbers of Russian troops that were supposedly deployed to Belarus and ready to invade NATO countries. A statement from the Lithuanian Armed Forces says, quote, "Nothing even remotely like that is happening in Belarus." In recent days, German media circulated stories about the presence of 360,000 Russian soldiers in Belarus. Lithuania's State Crisis Management Center, which monitors threats to national security, responded quickly to these reports, calling them, quote, "blatant disinformation aimed at intimidating the public and sowing panic," end quote. Lithuania, a country of fewer than 3 million residents, borders with Belarus and the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. Even as Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban rubs shoulders with Russia's Vladimir Putin, Budapest has been quietly diversifying its supply of natural gas, recently with a contract for 2 billion cubic meters of the fuel signed with U.S. company Chevron. But as a crucial route for Russian natural gas into Hungary will soon be closed, the country has no other option than to look for alternative suppliers.
This is Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban visiting Vladimir Putin in Moscow in November. Hungary is currently getting around 90% of its natural gas from Russia. This dependency has grown in the past few years because, as experts say, for Budapest it's just good business.
Basically, what's Hungary trying to do is to still use the Russian natural gas to subsidize and to use the discount and transform it into profits.
But the party is soon going to be over. Bulgaria, the country which Russian gas has to flow through to make it to Hungary, said it will stop transmitting the fuel by 2028. Before then, Hungary needs to diversify. And it has been already quietly doing so by signing contracts with various suppliers, including France's Engie, UK's Shell and Azerbaijan's Sokar. Now they turn to Chevron, an American company.
Hungary can switch from Russian to non-Russian natural gas in months. There's no infrastructural problems, there's no economic reason to not do that. So basically, it's all about political will.
And Hungarians themselves are quietly admitting it. With this man, Károly Matrai, the CEO of the state-owned gas company MVM, admitting recently that his company will be able to supply Hungary even without Russian gas. And soon, the import of Russian gas will become illegal in the EU.
Vote is closed.
As the European Parliament has just adopted a law prohibiting buying the fuel from Moscow. If it's signed off on by member states, it will become part of EU's law. Hungary, of course, is opposing this legislation.
Protests have taken place across Slovakia's major cities amid public discontent over the government's decision to scrap the country's whistleblower office. But Slovakians aren't alone in their anger. Demonstrations are being held across Lithuania and Romania today, and tens of thousands marched in Hungary's capital Budapest on Saturday over a child abuse scandal in state facilities. Our correspondent Andrew Sweeney has more on a looming winter of discontent for Central Europe.
Protests took place in several Slovak cities on the evening of December 16th, the largest being held in the country's capital, Bratislava, where thousands came out to protest against the abolition of the whistleblower's office. However, other protests were also held in Trenčín, Košice, Prešov and other Slovak cities. Public discontent over the decision of the government to scrap the whistleblower's office, which protects informants who want to reveal corruption in state and private enterprises, has grown ever since the decision was made in early December. According to Martin Sklenar, a former defence minister of Slovakia, discontent over the decision may even lead to the governing coalition, which pushed through the bill, to lose support from its key voters.
People are not satisfied with the way that that things are going. We see actually quite a significant number of voters of the current coalition leaving the coalition.
Slovakia has been no stranger to protests in recent months. In November, the so-called chalk revolution swept the country. Students would leave messages written in chalk outside their schools and universities in protest against Prime Minister Robert Fico's pro-Russian policies. Protests are taking place in other parts of Europe as well. In Bucharest, Romania's capital, demonstrators have made their opposition to government judicial reforms made clear. In a similar vein, they fear that this will limit the government's ability to prosecute corruption. In Lithuania, demonstrators have come out to march against proposed reforms to the state media agency, in a move that they say will severely limit freedom of expression in the country. And in Budapest on Saturday, December 13th, tens of thousands of people came out to march and amidst public anger over the alleged cover-up of abuse against children at state care facilities and in juvenile detention centres. With public anger mounting across Central Europe, it could be a winter of discontent for this part of the continent. For TVP World in Prague, Andrew Sweeney.
Poland is marking the anniversary of Black Thursday, the deadliest day of the 1970s workers' protest when communist authorities opened fire to demonstrators along the Baltic coast. December 17th marks 55 years since Black Thursday, the bloodiest episode of the 1970 protest triggered by sharp increases in food prices under Poland's communist government. Memorial events have taken place in Gdynia, where shipyard workers were confronted by the army and police, who opened fire into a crowd of workers as they returned to their jobs. According to modern accounts, in Gdynia alone, 18 people were killed and hundreds wounded, with further deaths reported in Szczecin. As unrest spread across northern Poland, violent suppression left at least 44 people dead, with more than 1,000 injured and thousands arrested. And with that somber reminder of Poland's history, we end our midday report. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more news and features in just a moment.